A player can be cleared to return, the body can look ready, and the real problem can still be untouched. That's what makes Bukayo Saka's recovery so interesting, because once a player like him steps back into view, nobody is really asking only if he's fit enough to run. They're asking something harsher and much harder to answer in public. Does he still believe the same way he used to? That pressure lands differently on Saka because his game has never felt built on noise or theatre. It's in the small, repeatable acts people almost stop noticing when they become normal. Receiving the ball, squaring up a defender, taking that extra half step forward instead of the safe touchback, choosing the brave option again and again until it looks automatic. When that kind of player disappears for a while, the absence doesn't feel like a simple missing name on a team sheet. It creates a gap in rhythm, in trust, in expectation, and once that gap opens, every touch on the way back gets judged against the version people already have in their heads. That's why this recovery carried more weight than the usual comeback story. Saka isn't just seen as talented, he's seen as reliable, the sort of player people expect to keep showing up, keep taking responsibility, keep doing the difficult thing without making a drama out of it. So when a setback interrupts that, the threat isn't only to availability, it's to continuity. Suddenly the question changes from when will he be back to will he still look like himself when he is? And that second question is where confidence starts to matter more than medicine. Because confidence in football is usually misunderstood. People talk about it like it's a feeling, like some private glow that either comes back or it doesn't. But with a player like Saka, confidence is easier to spot in behaviour than expression. It's the speed of the decision, the willingness to repeat a risky action after it fails, the lack of pause before taking on the same challenge one more time. And once injury breaks that chain, the body may come back first while the freedom arrives much later. You can picture the difference. A physically recovered player can still check a run for a split second, still take the safer pass, still shape to attack and then think twice. From the outside, that hesitation is tiny, almost invisible, but at the highest level, it changes everything, because rhythm is made of those instant choices. If you've ever watched Saka at his most natural, that's what stands out. Not swagger, but flow. The sense that one action is already carrying him into the next. And the moment that flow is interrupted, the comeback stops being about health and starts becoming a test of identity. That's the hidden damage a setback can do. It doesn't only weaken the leg or interrupt training, it can disturb the automatic side of performance, the part that lets a player trust the body before the mind has time to argue. A recovery like Saka's puts that distinction under a bright light because he's a high visibility player, and in that kind of spotlight, hesitation doesn't stay private. It gets replayed, interpreted, compared to old standards. And if you've ever seen a player judged by what he used to do at full speed, hit like on this video, because that gap between being back and being fully yourself is where confidence gets exposed most clearly. What makes Saka such a useful case is that his version of confidence was never just about flair. It lived in repetition. The same direct run, the same willingness to receive under pressure, the same readiness to try again after contact, pressure, or a failed move. So when he returned to action, the most meaningful signs were never likely to be some dramatic, cinematic moment that settled everything at once. They were always going to be smaller and more revealing than that. Whether he kept asking for the ball, whether he still moved toward pressure instead of away from it, whether the old decisiveness started showing up before the headlines could declare him fully back. And that's the part fans often rush past, because public expectation hates a gradual answer. People want the clean story: injured, recovered, returned, finished. But confidence almost never obeys that timeline. It tends to come back in layers, and not in a straight line either. One sequence can look free and sharp, and the next can look cautious again, which is exactly why a comeback under scrutiny becomes such a mental test. The player is rebuilding in motion while the audience is grading every step as if the reconstruction should already be complete. There's a wider sporting pattern in that, even if Saka gives it a very modern shape. High-level confidence is rarely rediscovered like a lost object. It's rebuilt through repeated exposure to the thing that now feels uncertain. Not by waiting to feel perfect, but by doing the hard action before the feeling fully returns. For a player whose game depends on decisive choices, that means confidence is restored not when fear disappears, but when the familiar action becomes natural again under real pressure. And that leaves the biggest question still hanging. When the next truly defining moment arrives, does confidence show up first, or is it created in the act itself? That may be the real lesson in Saka's recovery. The comeback isn't just proof that a player can return. It shows how belief has to be rebuilt while everyone is watching, and how form and confidence don't come back on the same schedule. With Saka, the deeper story isn't whether he could get back on the pitch. It's how a player rebuilds trust in his own rhythm, his own choices, his own game, one repeated action at a time. And if you think confidence comes back naturally with form, or has to be rebuilt deliberately after a setback, subscribe and tell me where you stand, because that answer changes how we understand every comeback that follows. That's where the easy story falls apart, because a return doesn't prove anything by itself. The shirt is back on, the boots are laced, the crowd sees Saka on the pitch again, and from the outside that looks like the ending. But for a player like him, that's often when the real test begins, because now every first touch, every decision to drive at a defender, every pass played safe instead of brave gets read like evidence, and those early return moments can raise the pressure instead of easing it. That's what makes Saka such a revealing case. He isn't just any player trying to find rhythm in private. He's a high visibility one, the kind people watch closely even when he does something ordinary. So when he comes back and takes a few careful touches, or chooses control over risk, or pauses for that extra beat before attacking space, those tiny choices suddenly mean more than they should. And the question shifts from, is he fit enough to play, to something much harder, does he trust himself enough to play like himself yet? Once that question is in the air, the comeback stops being a medical story and becomes a public trial of belief. The strange part is that confidence rarely returns when people expect it to. It doesn't usually arrive in one dramatic flash, with one perfect run or one big headline moment that settles everything at once. More often, with a player like Saka, it starts in smaller visible actions. Asking for the ball again, repeating a movement that matters to his game, trying the same kind of action after one doesn't quite come off, and then doing it again before doubt can harden into habit, because that repetition is what slowly turns caution back into instinct. You can almost picture the loop as it rebuilds. One clean action leads to a little more freedom. A little more freedom sharpens the next decision. A sharper decision creates another successful moment. And now the body and mind begin to speak the same language again. That's why confidence in recovery is less about feeling fearless than about stacking enough ordinary, successful actions that fear stops controlling the next choice. And if you've ever watched Saka and felt how much those small repetitions matter before the bigger moments arrive, this is the kind of football story worth liking the video for, because it reminds us that belief is usually built in plain sight long before it gets celebrated. But that rebuilding loop only matters if it survives contact with pressure. It's one thing to look smoother after a few appearances, to move with more rhythm, to choose the bolder option a little earlier. It's another thing entirely when the game asks for responsibility again. That's when recovery reaches its sharpest edge, because confidence isn't really tested when the action is safe and the stakes are low. It's tested when the ball comes back to you in a moment that can still go wrong, and the player has to decide whether to hide from that moment or step into it anyway. This is the broader lesson in Saka's recovery, and it reaches beyond one spell out and one return. We often talk about confidence like it's a permanent trait, as if some players simply have it and others do not, but recovery exposes how fragile that idea is. Confidence looks much more like a system. Trust in the body, trust in timing, trust in the decision before the crowd has time to judge it, and the ability to absorb a setback without letting it rewrite the next action, which is why one awkward touch or one quiet outing doesn't mean the rebuild has failed, but it does raise the next question. Because once confidence is understood that way, the comeback becomes less romantic and more demanding. Saka doesn't just need his game back in some abstract sense. He has to keep renewing it through response. If a move breaks down, does he try it again later? If a game feels heavy, does he still ask for the ball in the next one? If the outside noise starts comparing the current version of him to the earlier, freer one, can he keep acting his way forward rather than waiting to feel fully restored first? That's the part fans often miss. And if you think confidence has to be rebuilt deliberately rather than just arriving on its own, subscribe. Because that idea explains why some returns grow stronger with time while others stall under the weight of expectation. And that leads to the final pressure point, the one that gives the whole recovery its meaning. Not rehab, not headlines, not the first game back, the next big moment. The next time the game asks Saka to take responsibility, to make the demanding run, to choose the brave option, to live with the risk that comes with being the player people expect him to be, because that is where confidence is really measured. So what does Saka's recovery teach about confidence? That it isn't a switch that flips back on when the body is cleared. It's rebuilt through rhythm, through repeated actions, through patience, and through the refusal to let scrutiny decide your identity for you. And the truth is, we never fully know a comeback at the moment it begins. We only understand it when the next defining test arrives, and Saka chooses, once again, whether to step toward it or away from it.